Hey, Internet, welcome back to another episode of New Foundations, the podcast brought to you by Acropolis, the Bitcoin Treasury company. I'm here again with Chase, Bobby. We have a great guest this week, Dylan LeClair. Dylan LeClair, I'm going to let him do an intro on himself, but I think most people in the Bitcoin community and people that are interested in Bitcoin treasuries know who Dylan is. So, really excited to have him on the show. Welcome, Dylan.
Hey, thanks, guys. I'm excited to be here. I've followed you guys and some of the podcasts you guys have done from the start. So excited to chat a bit on the general thesis, the outlook, and what maybe to expect in the coming years.
We've got a lot to cover today, so if you don't mind, like I said, I think most people know, but just give a quick 90-second intro on yourself.
Cool. Yeah, I my name's Dylan. I started paying attention to Bitcoin back in high school, 2018, 2019. I did a year of school, dropped out, went full time into the Bitcoin world, wrote some articles for Bitcoin Magazine, started up their analysis. It's now sort of a platform, Bitcoin Magazine Pro. I worked with UTXO management for a bit, doing some, crunching some numbers for their public hedge fund, and now I work with Metaplanet in a Japanese listed company, implementing a Bitcoin standard. So that's the TLDR.
So today we're going to talk a lot about MicroStrategy. We're going to talk Metaplanet, corporate treasuries, U.S. Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. But really just want to hop right into MicroStrategy and, to go from zero to raising accretive capital the way that Sailor is. What do you think is a fair estimated timeline for other public companies to consider what MicroStrategy, Mara, Metaplanet, and yourself are doing?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I sort of expect it to be, kind of like the Square approach to start, or even right, similar kind of, stacked Bitcoin with cash to start. Same with MicroStrategy, right? And then, as the conviction kind of ticked on, as the public markets, kind of understood that this was an ongoing thing. It's not a one-off hype announcement. The shareholder base sort of transforms, right? Like you can't dive into this and you can't announce a Bitcoin treasury strategy and then say, hey, we're issuing convertible debt in the same day, right? Because you're going to have incumbent investors that have no idea what you're doing, think you're, super irresponsible or risky, or just aren't on board. So I think one of the things that we've thought pretty consciously about at Metaplanet, with the hindsight of kind of observing like the MicroStrategies of the world, really only MicroStrategy for 4 years, is that we very much want to kind of condition our new and old shareholders alike that this is the intent and this is the strategy, and there's not a plan B. There's not an end goal. There's no price target. This will be a sort of a perpetual game plan. And so I think we're gonna see like maybe like the rumbles of the world, right? Like buy like $20 million of Bitcoin. Um, but everybody kind of has their Bitcoin story. You buy a little bit, you watch it go up 2 to 5 times over, and then you realize, hey, maybe I should buy some more. Maybe I should hold on to this and not sell it. And your kind of plan changes. So I think I don't really expect 10 companies to decide that they want to lever their entire balance sheet and dilute their equity to infinity to buy Bitcoin. I sort of expect it to be more of a, as Bitcoin rips past 100,000, everybody realizes that the career risk is completely gone. It's de-risked. BlackRock's ETF is the best performing ETF in history, in terms of inflows. So like it's that left tail of not only like the left tail of zero for Bitcoin's distribution of possible like probability, but also like the career risk is now gone. And I think that's the biggest thing, right? The career risk of owning a 1% Bitcoin allocation is like, and I think that's where probably most CFOs start, right? It's harder to take a business that's extremely capex intensive or has a ton of future liabilities to turn on a Bitcoin standard 0 to 100. But I think we can expect a bunch of companies in 2025 in the SP 500 or just globally to realize that okay, a 1, 5, 10, 20% position is actually pretty prudent at this stage. So I think that's how it starts, and then maybe a half a cycle or a year, 4 years down the line, all of a sudden that firm that took a 5% stake is now implementing a full corporate Bitcoin standard. That's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, and Dylan, obviously yourself and Metaplanet are openly following the MicroStrategy playbook, but in the Japanese market. And so, correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is that in some ways Metaplanet actually has an advantage over MicroStrategy because the trade that MicroStrategy is ultimately doing is kind of borrowing dollars, the weaker currency or the depreciating currency, to acquire Bitcoin, the appreciating asset. But what you can do at Metaplanet is actually borrow in yen, which is an even faster depreciating currency to acquire the appreciating asset. So how do you think about that as, perhaps a nuanced or strategic advantage over what even MicroStrategy is able to do?
Yeah. Well, the case for Bitcoin in Japan is very obvious. The debt to GDP is the highest, I believe, in the world, but definitely in the developed world. The yen is structurally weak, and there's the demographics kind of point to there being no clear solution other than debasement. So that was kind of one of the reasons we decided to go all in on this. Outside of just being bullish Bitcoin itself, we've tapped the debt markets, not on the kind of long duration convertible side. Um, to date, but we've done some straight bonds against the hotel at less than 100 basis points, kind of shorter duration. Right. So I think that, MicroStrategy and Marathon are now, Marathon just did it again this morning, issuing 0% convertible notes for, 2031. I think, my kind of long standing thesis, or at least for the last year, as it's, become increasingly clear, is that these convertible notes are kind of like the I wouldn't even call it a Trojan horse, but it's like it's like Bitcoinizing the bond market, right? This is Bitcoin's volatility, which was for the longest time regarded as a bug, as something that would inhibit mass adoption. That volatility is the reason that optionality in a convertible note has value. And now you see serial issuer like MicroStrategy is the biggest component of like the iShares convertible note ETF. So this is like the first Marathon's convertible notes, MicroStrategy's convertible notes. These are the first Bitcoin bonds, and it's like a securitization, a Bitcoinization of the legacy securities market. And I think a lot of people in crypto kind of thought like, okay, real world assets, put them on chain. And the real meta, I think, is that Bitcoin is becoming securitized. And so Metaplanet definitely is exploring everything. But to date, we haven't kind of done that long duration conversion yet. But we're exploring every opportunity.
So Dylan, MicroStrategy is pioneering the adoption of Bitcoin-backed bonds. How do you see this growing outside of the demand the MicroStrategy is able to fill with its issuance, or do you believe they're going to continue to dominate this particular market going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think MicroStrategy is definitely, they are the biggest game in town and will continue to be. I think they're probably there's no one that's in the public markets that I would say is within shot of catching MicroStrategy, because even and Saylor laid this out, but even let's just say Nvidia or $1 trillion kind of these mega cap tech companies adopted MicroStrategy's idea. They still, MSTR is 120% Bitcoin exposure on their balance sheet, and that's not the case. That's not the case for one of these incumbents. And likewise, if you're smaller than MicroStrategy, the rate of change at which you have to be compounding at to come within a spitting distance of them is a bit laughable. So I think that they'll maintain their kind of preeminent position, but that I think that if you just kind of talk with some of these convert desks or even some of the guys on the equity side, right? Like you can't have you can't if you run a convert desk or you run an equity fund, right? You hold tech stocks or U.S. equities, and you're a multi-billion-dollar asset manager. You can't have 100% of your portfolio in one stock or one bond. You can't have even 50%. You're lucky if you can have 10. So I think what a lot of these guys are coming up against is that they love the name, they love the idea, the thesis is as strong as ever, but they can't have any more exposure, relative to their portfolio. So I think that that opens up the doors for the Marathons, the Semlers, the Metaplanets, the XYZ company that adopts the Bitcoin standard into the future. But I think ultimately it kind of goes from like, okay, that's a Bitcoin company. And if we're thinking about this 10 years from now, I actually truly believe that this is going to be, what the most forward thinking, kind of innovative, sharp public companies do. Maybe we're in a world where, Bitcoin Treasury company as we know it is just a public company. That's like, I think a while out. I think we're 5 to 10 years, maybe 20 away from this being commonplace. But I don't think that there is, while MicroStrategy may locally or relatively be sort of saturating the convert market in the United States, I don't think that the demand for Bitcoin exposure in the bond market is going anywhere. I think it's actually going to probably increase by 1 or 2 orders of magnitude. If we kind of think about where this is going. So it's not a worry to me, but they've definitely laid out the playbook, and there's definitely an insatiable demand for that sort of exposure.
Yeah, and Dylan, I'm personally a MicroStrategy holder, and I've kind of had similar experiences to trying to orange pill other folks around me, but in this case, MicroStrategy pills some folks. And one pushback that I keep hearing from people that are skeptical about MicroStrategy's flywheel, or what's often referred to as the infinite money glitch, is this idea of MNAV, or their net asset value, coming back down to zero, back down to one, to basically match the value of their current Bitcoin holdings. And the question really here is about whether they'd be able to continue issuing shares at a premium if it goes below one MNAV. And so one thing that I had previously thought was, okay, if it drops below one, then MicroStrategy can actually do stock buybacks, and that would actually become accretive and could also help push the share price above that MNAV of one back into a premium. But then I was thinking, well, where is the cash going to come from to buy back the stock? So I'm just curious how you think about the levers that Saylor and MicroStrategy have when it comes time to try to push MNAV back above one if it ever gets below one again.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question to ask. Of course, you have to evaluate all the risk factors. I mean, I think that with the fair value accounting coming in Q1, you can already adopt it, but MicroStrategy said they're adopting it at the end of, at the Q1 earnings. The whole MNAV debate and the Bitcoin Treasury and the fact that it should only be valued at its total Bitcoin. I mean, like, Bitcoin price appreciation is now earnings as of Q1 for MicroStrategy. So like, there was the smartest hedge fund managers and value investor guys, and half the people that saw the big short coming and bought credit default swaps were saying, okay, well, Tesla is like dramatically overvalued, and they shorted it in 2017 and 2018 and 2020, and Tesla went from 100 billion to $1 trillion in 2020, in the span of like 18 months. And that was COVID or whatnot. But, now they're in the S&P 500, and everybody that shorted them and was right about the relative overvaluation and the disconnect of fundamentals and, the fact that this is getting gamma squeezed, like, it didn't matter. They all lost money, and Tesla is $1 trillion and now, reflexively improved their fundamentals. So, when I think about MNAV, it's like, look, the people that are saying it's overvalued today, it's like, okay, fair point. You can do some basic arithmetic. But in October 1st, I posted this just yesterday, running some numbers. In October 1st, the share price was like $165. They had 250,000 Bitcoin. The market cap to NAV ratio was 2.5x. Today, the share price is like 380. They have 400,000 Bitcoin, and the market cap to NAV multiple is 2.5x or 2.6x. So like, the point is that the equity markets are forward looking. And you have a bunch of buyers, whether it's hedge funds, you have multiple central banks that own MicroStrategy, right? So it's like, these people that are like trying to relative value trade this, like, there's not a ticker that you can trade the market cap multiple, right? And so like, anybody that was playing a relative valuation game, okay, yeah, it went from 3 to 2.6, in the last 2 weeks, but MicroStrategy's share price in the last month and a half has gone from 200 to 400. So like, you didn't make any money, you lost money. Right. So So like I think that there's definitely a chance that I would say it's very likely as the market matures and as MicroStrategy continues to accumulate massive Bitcoin that there's somewhat of a compression. In a theoretical world where it goes to zero, you can issue convertible bonds at a premium, and while trading at 1x NAV, your Bitcoin is worth 10 billion, your market cap's 10 billion. If you issue a convertible note to buy Bitcoin, it's accretive on a Bitcoin per share basis. That's not even including the fact that if Bitcoin appreciates, and then your debt absolves and you're selling those shares at a premium, and the Bitcoin's appreciating and being booked as earnings, right? Which equity markets have to discount it to the future. I think if it trades under NAV, right? If the market cap is 9.5 billion and the Bitcoin value is 10, you do the same thing. And this is, where as we go into the future, Bitcoin's volatility would likely decline. And right, so that leverage ratio they're optimizing for can be tuned up, right? So like, okay, what do you do in that scenario? Well, you issue convertible bonds at a premium to the current price. You leverage up the balance sheet even more. You can still borrow at zero because your volatility is still very high. I think they're going to optimize for high volatility forever, right? If Bitcoin vol goes from 60 to 30 to 20, well, MicroStrategy is just going to add more debt to the balance sheet in the same way that a real estate developer is way more levered than a prudent Bitcoin holder would be right now, right? And so I think that in that world, right, they're going to continue to just optimize. You don't have to do a convert if you don't want. You can do a straight bond, okay? Straight bond at 6% interest for 7 years. Well, is Bitcoin going to appreciate more than that? So these are all things that I think that they are actively looking at. And I'm, even if there's a decrease in net asset value, I think all the Bitcoin maximalists that own the stock understand what they own, and it's the traditional financial world that is trying to do the math, and it's not mathing for them, right? And so that's where the alpha is. And I'm very confident that MicroStrategy is continued to be the biggest story in finance. And so that that probably warrants I would say a order of magnitude higher valuation than today, given where we all think Bitcoin's going.
Yeah, and just to double click on that really quickly. So now the appreciation on their Bitcoin holdings with the FASB changes going into effect in 2025 for all businesses, that's going to reflect as earnings. That's going to change their earnings per share, which is, what investors in TradFi look at a glance. Do you expect that to be the biggest swing change in earnings per share ratio that the market has ever seen? And is that going to be the moment where traditional investors wake up to this stock? What's going to be the effect of that?
Yeah, I mean it's a bit of an unknown, but I think I saw some numbers. I should know this off the top of my head. But it was like I think it was it's like 15, right at the current price, it's like a $15 billion earnings print for Q1. Per share, I think someone said it was like $60 per share for a $380 stock in a quarter. And obviously that's, 4 years of backdated, but the point is that there's an information asymmetry there, because half the time when you see someone saying, oh, MicroStrategy is just a gimmick and it's irrational, it's a bubble, they say it doesn't even make money. It lost 400 million last quarter or last year. And it's like, no, they didn't actually, because there's $700 million of impairment that they had to mark down on their balance sheet for the Bitcoin that they couldn't mark back up, right? And so, I just threw those numbers out there, but the point is that like no one outside of like kind of this, niche Bitcoin world knows that there's kind of that handicapped accounting standard today, that's changing. And, people like my grandpa, when, if they look at MicroStrategy, they are on Charles Schwab and they just look at, the earnings, and then it's like negative, right? And so I think once that changes, then we live in a world where we've had, companies go to 10, 50, $100 billion, $500 billion valuations while not making money, right? Or burning money, right? Anybody that said Amazon was overvalued in 2008 because their price to earnings was 100 is an idiot, right? So I think that's kind of how I think about this now. It's a big tech monopoly. The whole thing is like digital capital is this, next wave of innovation and kind of like tech revolution. And I think that MicroStrategy is obviously the monopoly in public markets. They have 2% of the total supply. So what's that worth in a Bitcoinized world? that's worth a lot, and the optionality there to be a lender or acquire other businesses or whatever it may be has to be discounted. That's how equities work. So I actually don't even think that the valuation is all that crazy. I actually think it's quite rational. But we'll see how well that ages.
Yeah, Dylan, I remember just earlier this year when they got to 1% of the supply and we all freaked out. And we're like, how did they do that? How high are they going to go? And now we're at 2%. I think it's feasible they get to 3-4% if they really crank it to the next 6 months. Yeah, how much is that worth? I guess time will tell. But there are regulations around, what public companies are allowed to say regarding their stock price. You're not allowed to go out and say, I believe that if you work at Google and you're an executive, you can't go and say you believe that Google stock is going to the moon. But companies that hold Bitcoin can bullishly speak about Bitcoin's price appreciation. So what do you think about that distinction? Because I've been seeing a lot of Jason Calacanis from the All In podcast on X, throwing shade at Saylor about exactly this. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, he's been wrong about Bitcoin for 7 years, all the while trumpeting his Uber seed check. So, I mean, I don't really care what he says. He's obviously wrong, and he knows he's wrong, and he's salty. But we'll see when he changes his tune. They have a history of kind of coming to the ideas when they're most popular and the most money's flowing around. So I wouldn't be surprised for Jason to become a Pupco SPAC maximalist in about a few months. We'll see.
Well, kind of shifting into some of the corporate treasury talk, Dylan, how would you describe your primary role just when it comes to advising companies and helping them integrate Bitcoin into their treasury strategy?
Well, yeah, it's I think it's still very, very early. The idea is still very nascent, and I think it's the big, like, we'll see how this Microsoft shareholder vote goes, but I would love to be surprised here, but I think that the incumbent giants, monopolies, if you have a business that's massively growing or cash flowing, you don't really need the Bitcoin treasury strategy right now. That's not what you're optimizing for. That's not what your incumbent legacy shareholder base is looking for. It's like even MicroStrategy has said it. We have said it from Metaplanet. Like there is you're kind of backed into a corner looking for what to explore. I joined the company after the Metaplanet in May, a couple weeks after the Bitcoin pivot. But like Saylor said, like we tried everything for 10 years. We were gaining cash, but we were losing it as fast given the debasement of the dollar. We kind of stumbled into this opportunity. We bought some Bitcoin, but we weren't a Bitcoin treasury company. So I think the role for Bitcoin on public treasuries. I think the good news is for you guys is that there's going to be a lot of handholding early on. If there isn't someone like in the C-suite, CFO, CEO, chairman of the board that's like gung-ho about this and manages to kind of get everybody on board, then it's going to be extremely tough, for us at Metaplanet, we bought some Bitcoin, we borrowed money to buy Bitcoin. And then through that, in the first few months of the strategy, we were mark to market on never mind the debt. We're not even counting the debt. We were down 25% on the purchases at just like at one point, probably a day, right? But if that was a business that was like if that wasn't the all-in pivot, right, and you just had some kind of rogue stakeholder say, hey, this is a great idea, convince everybody, and all of a sudden it's down 25%. That's a tough place to be for trying to explain yourself, or no, like, let's stay with this, let's stay convicted. If you're on the wrong side of a bull market, do you have 2.5 years of patience and explaining in Bitcoin podcasts to send to that C-suite? So I think that's where this is going to be a bit challenging. I think not for us, I would say, but I think there's going to be a lot of companies that come at the most exuberant part of this cycle that are going to have a gut check. I mean, even MicroStrategy, right, had a gut check where they were unwavering. They continued to buy. Saylor didn't change his tune. Front page of the Wall Street Journal where they were, saying he bet everything and lost. But that's, that pressure is not one that is, usually if you're a CFO, you kind of want to get in, get out. You have a few years of vesting. You don't want to rock the boat. And so I think that it's still, despite Bitcoin kind of flirting with 100,000, it's still a little bit fringe and still a little bit kind of adventurous, if you will. And I think that changes definitely, but it's gonna take some time, and it's gonna take some some higher prices to make this more of a consensus bet. But I think that's where the alpha is, right?
Right. And obviously, everybody on this call, I mean, we might be for the most bullish people in the world on Bitcoin's role in corporate treasuries. And I think we're all pretty familiar, and maybe our listeners have become familiar recently in kind of the limitations of traditional treasury assets, whether it's bonds or, just simply what a lot of businesses do, which is just holding cash in a bank account. But what do you believe is the single most misunderstood aspect of Bitcoin's role in corporate treasury?
Good question. I think this isn't anything new for the the Bitcoin or the MicroStrategy audience, but it's for our own board, we have a couple folks that are very much in the traditional finance side. It's that, hey, like this volatility, and the fact that our stock, we went up 2,000% and then crashed 80%. That's actually more optimal than than a flat line. The volatility is actually good for us. We want the massive volume. We want, if Bitcoin is trading at 70,000 and it goes to 90 and then falls back to 80 overnight, and then the next morning our stock's hammered, and that's good for us. We want liquidity, we want volume, we want volatility. We want everybody to be, tick for tick looking at the Bitcoin market and the value of our treasury and playing these ARB games. Like, that's all good for us. The volatility is something we want to lean into. While we haven't done any sort of like convertible instruments, we've done a rights issue and have some stuff with warrants. And so I think for that, like, that's obvious to us. We've publicly said this to our shareholders. We're cheering that we're the most volatile stock in Japan. We're leaning into it. But I think that, for the traditional, financial firm or kind of investment board or investment committee, it's like volatility. Whoa, super risky. And obviously it cuts both ways. Volatility in a bear market when you're leveraged is pretty brutal. But this is something that we want to lean into. So I think this is something that MicroStrategy didn't. I don't think they figured it out, and no one did, to be fair, until kind of 2021, 22, and really leaning into it this year, where the volatility is like something they're fine tuning and optimizing for and championing. The open interest on MSTR options is ridiculous. I think it's the most liquid market outside of Tesla and Nvidia. But yeah, I think that's still somewhat of a it's foreign. It's a foreign concept. It's a foreign concept in finance. Volatility equals risk, essentially. But for us, that volatility is vitality line is something that we very much live by.
And this is kind of related to what Mason was bringing up earlier. Like, you can't really pump your stock price on national TV, but you can talk favorably about Bitcoin. How do you manage or even influence the market perception when a company declares Bitcoin holdings? Like, what are the behind the curtain conversations that C-level executives are having and trying to address to make sure they go about it properly?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a different for a company of our size. Never mind where we were 6 months ago. Compared to a Fortune 500 company that that's a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, right? Or even like Semler Scientific, right? Like, they're a medical manufacturing company. They have a core business. They don't want to rock the boat. They're not like, if you go to metaplanet.jp, our website, there's a big Bitcoin, planet with a Bitcoin logo and Bitcoin all over the place. We want to be a Bitcoin company. We are a Bitcoin company. That everybody that buys Bitcoin is not going to do that, and we know that. But this was something that it was a transformation of our business for Metaplanet. So Bitcoin Magazine Japan the license was acquired. we kind of have an idea to expand in any sort of way we see fit around the Bitcoin space, as long as it's, positive for shareholders. But that obviously that's not the path for everybody. I think there's going to be a lot of companies, whether it's next year or the years following, that it's boring. They're not going to report their Bitcoin purchases every Monday morning at 8 a.m. They're going to report their Bitcoin purchases 4 times a year. And I think that's fine, right? Like that's what Square does, is like every quarterly report, it's like, hey, we bought 100 more Bitcoin or 1,000 more Bitcoin. I think that's probably the norm. But in the meantime, right, I think there's also going to be companies that openly, see an advantage into leaning into it, right? Like a Semler, that say, okay, well, we're more comfortable with this. Our shareholder base is more comfortable with this. We're entering, an ATM. We bought more Bitcoin. Here's our BTC yield, our Bitcoin increase in BTC increase per fully diluted share count. So I think like all that stuff is kind of the differentiator. And I don't think there's a wrong answer. It's more just kind of about, what's the situation of a company. If you're Johnson & Johnson, you're not going to adopt BTC yield tomorrow. It makes no sense. But if you're a $1 billion company or smaller and you want to differentiate yourself in a international market or even in the US, there's a lot of advantages that come to kind of, being open and championing a strategy.
And when Metaplanet and yourself, when you went in and got active with the board, and you're talking about this strategy of acquiring Bitcoin for the balance sheet and obviously trying to create this volatility that is to the benefit of a public corporation with the stock price moving up and down, and how that allows you to generate liquidity and borrow at lower rates and all of that. How do you all think about the decision of buying spot Bitcoin versus just buying IBIT or an ETF? And if you do buy spot Bitcoin, which, knowing you, I'm kind of assuming that you guys are holding spot Bitcoin, how do you think about custody with all the kind of corporate controls that might be needed?
Yes, I mean, it's a whole process. And, we went through, a couple of months that we talked with, 10 different custodians. In Japan, there's some interesting regulations around just custody and how it's accounted for. And if we're accounting for our Bitcoin as long-term holdings, so there's kind of sort of like the equivalent of a qualified custodian in Japan, that if you they hold them, they attest to say, hey, these coins aren't moving, and we don't have to. Otherwise, we'd have to, if we just held it on our own hardware wallet, we'd have to pay an unrealized gains tax. Funny enough, not funny, but that's just the way it goes. So we're with a Japanese custodian right now, and have a large balance sheet, segregated addresses. These were all things that we made sure. We're doing proof of reserves as well. But these were all things that we were clear that they were a line in the sand for us. So we talked to custodians and said, okay, well, hey, our cold storage, we have all this Bitcoin. And we said, we need the address segregated, and said, well, we can't do that. Our engineering works this way and that way. Said, okay, well, that's fine. We will agree to disagree and move on. So like stuff like that, where, it's cold storage BTC. There is no ETFs in Japan. We don't want to hold securities in the US. There's laws where you can't own, I think it's 40% of your market cap in a security. Otherwise, you're an investment company in one security. And so, where Bitcoin's commodity, so there's a lot more flexibility there. I think also, it's interesting that, Bitcoin as collateral now, the US ETFs options have opened up. There's going to be a lot of companies that, you can hedge out some of the risk, right? If Bitcoin rips a bunch, you can sell some calls, sell puts or do whatever. You could utilize Bitcoin as collateral. I think that market, while open already, is very nascent at the institutional level. I think that changes rapidly. So, there's a world where having a big stack of Bitcoin all of a sudden lets you borrow at basically the Fed funds rate plus 50 basis points, right? And who wouldn't want to do that? And I think that's an advantage that isn't even being utilized yet. Obviously, convertible notes are unsecured and 5 or 6 years out. But I think as a financing tool, it's still very, very nascent. So for us, we want to own the commodity. We want to own the cold storage BTC. And I think there's clear reasons to do that other than just owning the IBIT, kind of security wrapper.
considering Bitcoin's volatility in these like early stages of its adoption, what strategies is Metaplanet using, if you can speak on that, to manage volatility, or what are the strategies that corporates are discussing to manage that volatility as well?
I mean, we're not really managing it. We're just riding the wave. Uh, but yeah, I mean, we're kind of viewing it the same way as I think Sailor and MicroStrategy aim to, which is we aren't really as worried about the day-to-day fluctuations, and we're more worried about in Bitcoin terms, how can we accrue more value for shareholders. So we just kind of filed. For moving strike warrants, which is basically our equivalent of an ATM structure. There is no ATM structure in Japan, so we worked with the regulators to kind of figure out a kind of a roundabout solution, which are these moving strikes. So it's tied to an 11-day VWAP ongoing basis that's open for 6 months, and with a fixed amount of shares. Instead of in the U.S., you can do a fixed currency amount. So we can say $100 million ATM. You can't do that in Japan. So we have a fixed amount of shares. So for us, I mean, we're thinking about this not in the BTC USD exchange rate term, but we're sort of thinking about, okay, what's our fully diluted market cap in BTC terms? What's our Bitcoin treasury? Is it optimal to issue equity right now? Is it optimal to issue debt right now? And that's sort of our ongoing calculus. So we're moving as fast as we can to sort of implement that, but public markets take time. Kind of local regulations take time. Kind of like similar to Semler, right? Where they filed for a shelf registration around July, around the Bitcoin conference, and the SEC took like 2 months, right? So I think the starting gates, right? Okay, make sure the boards, on board, make it, getting all these kind of securities registration things filed and out there, making sure your shareholder base is on board. And then I think for us, we're kind of at the period now, like month 7, where we can start to turn on the jets a little bit. So we're really excited for 2025, having kind of done a lot of the dirty work. I think it's been a fantastic year for us. Our Bitcoin treasury is like 7 times the value of our market cap in April. So we've gone as fast as we can, but yeah, I mean, I think we're not really too concerned with the day-to-day volatility. We're just hoping it doesn't run away from us before we can stack more, honestly.
Yeah, and honestly, huge congrats to what you and Metaplanet have pulled off so far, bringing the playbook to the Japanese market. Kind of turning to nation-state game theory a bit here, and you just kind of talked about how you're excited for 2025. Polymarket, which was very accurate when it came to the political predictions and a lot of other predictions, they have the odds for a United States strategic Bitcoin reserve within the first 100 days at around 24%. Where would you put the odds? And if this were to be announced, what are kind of the implications over, say the entire term of Trump's presidency when it comes to global nation-state adoption?
Yeah, I think the market's a little too overweight on Trump's kind of tariff tweets and whatever about using the dollar. I think the Trump administration, Luke Gromen had actually a really interesting take, and I agree wholeheartedly, that they sort of view JD Vance has been talking about Dutch disease and when he was a senator talking about how the strong dollar has basically kind of completely hollowed out the industrial base of the U.S. Trump has said for years, even the last year or so when he wasn't in office yet, talking about how other countries are exploiting the U.S. right because they're weakening their currency, and at the same time he's saying all this. Hey, we're going to tariff. We're going to throw 100% tariffs on you if you use other currencies of the dollar. So it's like, well, what does he mean, right? At one point he's saying, well, the dollar's too weak, and then the dollar's too strong, and then he's saying, well, hey, don't use another currency. We're going to keep this dollar strong. And I think the to thread the needle, what he's actually referring to is that the dollar is the world reserve currency, and for the longest time, the world reserve assets like treasuries. And I think a lot of the basically the long end is kind of out to lunch right now. There's not really any long duration debt out there. And I think the current administration tacitly is sort of kind of open to saying, okay, well, Bitcoin has a big role to play as a $5 or $10 trillion asset. And if we hyper financialize this asset, like the U.S., one of the best things we're good at is financializing things. Financializing the mortgage bond, and like we have a history of kind of just taking an asset, collateralizing it, packaging it up into Wall Street. And so I think there's a recognition and a realization by a lot of smart people in Wall Street, in DC, that okay, hyper financializing Bitcoin is actually a lot better than hyper financializing the housing market. And if housing goes up by a factor of 10x, yeah, there's a wealth effect, but a lot of people are sleeping on the street. Versus if Bitcoin is collateralized and financialized, well, a lot of Americans get pretty wealthy, and there's definitely a kind of a Keynesian sort of wealth effect. So I think that in terms of the nation state game theory, I wouldn't be surprised leading up to Trump's inauguration if we see. I sort of actually really expect there to be a few really noteworthy El Salvador style announcements or leaks or developments. Whether it's legal tender or not is another thing, but I think the strategic Bitcoin reserve meme is far more than a meme at this point. And if I had to just psychoanalyze a bit, I think Trump is driven a lot by ego and legacy, and him saying "I love Bitcoin," never sell your Bitcoin at a Bitcoin conference, reading off the script, to then winning the election, Bitcoin breaks its all-time high and goes straight to 100,000. And then, country XYZ says, hey, we've bought a truckload of Bitcoin. I think there's no way Trump, goes in soft or backs down. I think Trump's driven by one-upping everybody. Trump's driven by tweeting about the stock market at all-time highs every day. So if this is a Trump pump, Trump's not going to come in and be a lame duck and just, sort of like, okay, well, it was nice and the crypto people are cool, but no, like I think Trump goes hard. And I think that, if I had to put odds on the polling market bet, I think the reason it's so low is because it's like from Jan 20 to April or something. But I think that I would probably put it closer to 60 to 70, 75% if I was a betting man. So yeah, I mean, I whether they're buying into the market or just not selling their stuff, I sort of expect that Trump 25 years from now is kind of recognized among other things as like the Bitcoin, the guy that started the Bitcoin kind of like Sputnik moment. And whether that's that age is like sour milk, we'll see. But I mean, if I had to give any sort of criticism, it's that there's the crypto grift is back in full swing. And that's not going to go away. So kind of keeping a clear message and a clear signal amidst all the noise is going to be very, very important for the Bitcoin people of the world and the companies and institutions and whatnot. And I think a lot of people, and even big money institutions, are going to kind of get muddled in all the silliness from the crypto reemergence. So. But I think that Trump is the strategic Bitcoin reserve is going to happen, I would say. I think he keeps his promise.
I guess maybe one last one for you, Dylan, from my end is just if you had to prioritize what you would like to see, whether it's the U.S. strategic Bitcoin reserve being announced, Bitcoin as legal tender in the United States, or no more cap gains tax on the sale of Bitcoin. How would you kind of rank those three in your head? Because, I've seen some interesting takes where, you could argue legal tender is more important than the other, or, yeah. So just how would you break that down?
Yeah, I mean, I think a legal tender would go hand in hand with the capital gains, but just for the sake of the question, I would say that no cap gains would be the biggest, would be the most impactful. I think the strategic Bitcoin reserve would send Bitcoin to the moon. Not even because the U.S. is buying, because the world knows there's a buyer, and then the world also starts to do the geopolitical game theory and kind of protecting themselves against that sort of reality. But I think if in a world where the capital gains tax for Bitcoin alone, which I don't know why they would do that, but not stocks or other forms of assets, but if it was Bitcoin alone where there's no cap gains, I think. If we were just all living in one big Puerto Rico, I think Bitcoin would go to seven figures quickly. I sort of don't expect that to happen, but I think the strategic Bitcoin reserve, at least now, but I think the strategic Bitcoin reserve is very much a political reality.
And I guess, do you think that Trump feels indebted to the crypto community because his biggest donor base was the crypto lobby?
I think one of the things that I've kind of heard through the grapevine is that, in particular, to like the Bitcoin, so like David Bailey kind of going on a solo mission to orange pill him, and there was people from the crypto world in Trump's ear or Trump's campaign's ear as well, but essentially, the asks from the Bitcoin side of the world, I can't talk for Fairshake or the crypto lobby, but from the Bitcoin side of the world was like, all right, come speak at our conference. You can do you, and free Ross, and every person that donates chump change to a political candidate is asked for the world, right? Do this, do that. I want this spot, this role, and David Bailey and co. essentially were like, yeah, come speak for an hour at our conference and free Ross Ulbricht, and so Trump I think is a big fan of that. He's like, and what's the catch? And so from what I hear, not only is kind of he's a fan of the Bitcoin kind of sphere of influence in the Trump circles, but also is through the process got orange pilled. I've heard he's told friends Bitcoin's the new oil, and people have been orange pilled by Trump. Saying that, hey, I've heard that this is like the next great American opportunity. So I think that's super cool. That it's not just like, yeah, obviously it's for votes. It's obviously pandering for votes. Everything in politics is pandering for votes and money. But through that process, I think that there's a meaningful sort of there's a stickiness to this all. Never mind the fact that like Barron is, I think, involved in crypto as well. So yeah, I think it was a brilliant chess move. It was obviously a little bit of a gamble. If it went the other way, then I think we're in a different story. But the Bitcoin would be undeterred in the long term. So yeah, I'm bullish. I think that Trump is. We'll see how it happens, but I think he'll hold up a lot of his promise.
All right, last question. How many countries do you think will have a strategic reserve at the very end of 2025?
Far more than the countries that announce it. I think
Yeah.
Russia, China, and Iran already have strategic Bitcoin. I think they already have Bitcoin they're not selling. Um, you know, uh, Whereas the U.S. is this open kind of democratic country, and they checks and balances, and it But I would think that every authoritarian regime in the world has some Bitcoin at this point that they've seized or whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I would say that I would put the line at 95% that we know of a BRICS country that owns Bitcoin and doesn't shy away from it by the end of 2025.
Well, it sounds like these Bitcoin conferences are going to continue to be big events now with Secret Service agents and literal TSA security everywhere. So, which was just crazy, from anyone who's ever been to a Bitcoin conference in the past, looking at it, what it was in this past year, and what we're going to look forward to in Vegas. It's just night and day. So, Dylan, really appreciate you coming on. Tell the folks where to follow you. Feel free to plug anything.
Yeah, appreciate the time, guys. It's been a lot of fun. You can find me on Twitter at Dylan LeClair _. Doing work with Metaplanet, metaplanet.jp if you want to read any of the disclosures, or we have some content on there as well from interviews or just generic Bitcoin stuff. So we'll make sure to link that there as well. But yeah, I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun, guys. We'll have to do it again sometime.
Thanks, Dylan.
All right. Free Ross.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the show. Quick reminder that New Foundations is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and nothing should be construed as investment, financial, or legal advice. Business owners, business operators, and those who are Bitcoin curious, let's connect. Visit acropolistreasury.com to learn more or to get in touch with our team.